We're Environment Trust. We have merged into Habitats and Heritage now, and we're working with English Heritage for this session. And next. So tonight we're looking at the session is Marble Hill Remembers. So we've got a focus on Remembrance Sunday and Armistice Day, but we're looking particularly at feeding Richmond and Twickenham and growing food. We'll start with a bit about Environment Trust, Habitats and Heritage and Marble Hill Revived. Then we'll be looking at allotments and food growing through time, through the 20th century particularly, but up to the present. In the First World War, Second World War, and a modern movement, and particularly Marble Hill. Next. And about us, Environment Trust, we have two major focus. One is on nature and conservation of nature, and we do work with lots of groups of volunteers when it's possible, which unfortunately it hasn't been so much this year, but you see people, children picking litter and building a bee bank. And we also have a focus on historic buildings, Grove Gardens Chapel we see here in Kilmorey Mausoleum, and conserving the best of local architecture in Southwest London. That's briefly us. And Rachel.
And the reason why we're working and supporting the Environment Trust and indeed Habitats and Heritage is because Marble Hill is being revived, which is a really exciting project that we're delighted that you're now part of this revival, having been come to this session. As many of you will know that at the moment there are a number of poppies around Marble Hill, and each poppy celebrates someone lost in our community. And it's because of this that we are sharing about our wartime history through the First World and the Second World War, to be able to honour those people who are fallen from in and around Marble Hill, and to also uncover some of those exciting things in our heritage, whether that be a bit more about the shelter that was on site, or whether that be about the allotments, which we're going to hear a lot more about later on. But that's all part of the Marble Hill Revived, which sees a number of different events that we're hosting for free. But that's just a small part of what this £6 million investment will give us. We're delighted that in the spring of 2022, our house is going to be open for free 5 days a week. So we are really looking forward to that opportunity to be able to share about that heritage, and it's being reinterpreted so that it is a house that is full of a soundscape and smellscapes, so that it can attract all your senses. As you know, our sports pitches are being revitalised, and the sports block is being invested in, so that for our community, sports will remain a very important part of Marble Hill life, but actually will be better for and safeguarding for the future. We'll see a lovely cafe that's going to be open this spring, and it will mean that every time you have a cup of coffee, that profit will be given back to the site, along with refreshed park signages and lovely new bins. There's a whole host of new local jobs that are being made, everything from catering teams to our amazing horticultural apprentice and play apprentice that we now have in post. But also our landscape is being invested in, and that's under the watchful eye of Kate, our super head gardener, and a host of gardening volunteers that she has, she's looking after and inspiring. And we really couldn't do it without our amazing volunteers who are supporting the life of Marble Hill Revived, whether that be through the gardens or whether that be through the research volunteers that have created the beautiful exhibition about wartime Marble Hill that you can see on site at the moment. So do come and see the poppies, do come and share in our remembrance, and we're really delighted that this is part of some of the events that can take place to share and remember that wartime history that Marble Hill, as indeed we all share. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks. That's great. So we've been working together, Environment Trust and English Heritage, for quite a number of years now. Marble Hill, children's groups of people with disabilities, nature conservation, art. And so this year's obviously very different. We're doing more online. We're still doing some live events, which is great. So let's get onto the agenda of the day. And we're talking about food growing across Greater London, but particularly Southwest London and locally. But what we're starting with is just a quick look at the geology and geography of the place. And Greater London is actually, although we would hardly know it now because it's so built over, is an amazingly fertile area, a big swathe of London clay surrounded by chalk land and chalk grassland, and with the Thames running through it with wonderful irrigation. So it's actually a very fertile area. And we see from 1811 that market gardens and parks and all kinds of food production were really central to keeping London going. In 1793, Thomas Batt did a review, and he wrote, "From Kensington to Hounslow, on either hand, for several miles, may be reckoned the great garden to the north of the Thames for the supply of London." So it's wonderful to think of London as a garden. And next. Okay, now we have a little quiz. So there's still a lot of growing that goes on, particularly in leafy places like Richmond. What we're asking you to do here is a poll. How many allotment plots are there now, right bang up to date, in the borough of Richmond? The choices are 500, 750, 1,000 and 2,000. And if you click your mouse on your choice and then press submit, we'll see how we estimate this. I know I can see there are actually some experts in this Zoom room who will probably know straight away. Okay, so make your choices.
Most people voted now. Oh, a few
right.
more coming in.
Have quite a few voted. Still some coming in. You can see the plots there on the sites on the map. Obviously, every site has quite a few plots within it. Okay, now before I did this, I would have estimated something like 750. But in fact, the experts in the room have predominated, and 45% think there are 2,000, which is actually the right answer, which is an amazing number. Okay, and next. Okay, so that brought us bang up to date, but looking at allotments through time, one of the big things that happened in the early 20th century, 1908, there was an act of Parliament putting a duty on local authorities to provide allotments, and it led to an allotment craze. We'll be looking at a picture of reflecting that. And before the Great War, 1914-18, there were in Britain 450,000 plots, but by the end of the war, there were 1.5 million. Again, between the wars, imports grew. 75% of Britain's food was imported in the 30s, but by 1941, that had halved, and the garden front had grown up, and there were 10,000 square miles of cultivated land. We'll be hearing a bit about the Dig for Victory campaign later, and the slogan, "Spades, not ships." And of course, that continued after the war. Rationing went on until 1954, so allotments were really important then. And in the 1970s, from the 1970s, there's a focus on health and food quality and self-sufficiency and more up-to-date food miles. So there's always great enthusiasm in this country and in many countries of Europe for growing our own food. And at 2019, for those 2,000 plots, there are actually 6,000 people on the waiting list for Richmond Borough allotments. So it shows the enthusiasm. So going right back to the beginning of that timeline, this is from 1910. Lobjoits were great market gardeners and producers, and had a big site in Barnes. And this is just showing a bit of Edwardian fun before all the difficult times of the coming decades. It's a sports day in 1910 where they're obviously competing to carry baskets. So that's just a bit of fun. Next. And I mentioned the allotments craze. I do beg your pardon. I mentioned the allotments craze, and this image is from the Garden Museum. Not quite sure where it's taken. It may be Elland in West Yorkshire, but it shows, I think, a mother and daughter in an allotment proudly showing off, and there's a gentleman in the background. Okay, and next. Next, Fran. So food during the First World War, before I started looking at putting this presentation together, I personally knew a lot more about the Second World War and Dig for Victory. But in fact, in the First World War, there were very similar issues. In 1914, 60% of Britain's food and 80% of the wheat was imported. But when war broke out, those imports were under threat, and growing became that much more important. I do beg your pardon. In 1916, there was actually a cultivation of lands order, which gave local authorities the power to take over wasteland without the consent of the owner if it had been abandoned, and for it to be cultivated. And there was a huge amount of cultivation. And some of the propaganda around then is very interesting. A sailor saying, "I risk my life to bring you food. Use it carefully, live on voluntary rations and win the war." And the photograph shows members of the Women's Auxiliary Force in Highbury cultivating the land there. So by 1917, there were 2 million tons of veg coming from allotments. And at the end of the war, Queen Mary and King George V did a tour of allotments. And there's some beautiful images and Pathé News sections, which I would encourage you to look up, showing them visiting piggeries and so on. And next. This is dotting about a bit in time. We'll be going back and forwards a bit in time. But for this image actually comes from the Jam Yesterday, Jam Tomorrow project of Environment Trust, as it was, and it was donated by Fred Mason, who's in the picture there, shown with Land Army women at the glass houses at Page's Nursery in Hampton. And a lot of Hampton was given over to glass houses for cut flowers, but during the war, obviously cut flowers were less needed, and the glass houses were given over to growing of food. So we see Land Army women there. Next. And we have another quiz. And a lot of people have heard of the Women's Land Army. But what's not so well known is that they were jointly with another group who were the Women's Land Army and the Women's Something Corps. And they're shown commemorated in a statue here. And what were they, is the question. Make your judgment. Construction, mining, timber, or transport. Great example of women's service on the home front. And again, from my personal experience, I'd heard of the Women's Land Army, definitely very famous, but not so, I hadn't of this other corps. How's the voting going, Fran? Are we getting the votes in? Okay, are we ready to look at our results?
Yep, a few more coming in.
A few more coming in. Okay, bit more time. Great. Okay. Well, this is slightly more evenly split. Mining very, very low, but quite a few people thought construction, some transport. Majority thought timber, and that is actually the correct answer. And this statue is actually at the National Arboretum in Staffordshire. And the nickname of the Women's Timber Corps was, I think rather cleverly, the Lumberjills. So, okay, next one. that just shows the statue and the dedication. Next, please. All right, in the second war, the Dig for Victory campaign, obviously very similar aim, set up October 1939, Ministry of Agriculture. And here we see a plea to women to help farmers by growing your own vegetables. So it's saying farmers give us so much, but there's only so much that they can do, and we have to help them. Women have to help them. Particular role for women in this advertising. And on the right, again, there's an insight on the role of women in Dig for Victory and in the home front and growing food. Here, the lady, the girl as she is then, is saying the allotment belonged to my granddad, who went off to war in May 1941, so my grandmother took it on. So it was very much a home front effort. And next. Locally, we can see, obviously, we have Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew here, and that was absolutely key in setting good practice. There was lots of information about how to grow and the best things to grow and how to get good yields and experimentation and so on. So an awful lot of research. And we see there a demonstration plot in front of the orangery. Obviously looks very different these days, and women working on that research and actually growing food. And next. Okay, oh, we have another quiz. Now, again, this is local. This is about a local industry, and Twickenham was famous for jam for much of the 20th century. Who owned the factory in Third Crossroad then? And these choices are Chivers, Beeches, Wilkin and Son, and Poupart's. And I know, I know from seeing some of the names of people here, some people will know immediately, but it may be news to some. And those are all named, I can tell you that those are all names of very large jam factories, companies in the 20th century. How's the voting going, Fran?
About 84% of people voted, so a couple more seconds.
Okay, a couple more coming.
Vote.
A couple more coming.
And there we go.
Oh, that's great. Can we move to the next slide at the same time? Great. Well, the answer is Poupart's. We've got a very expert audience. I think I should have done harder quizzes. And Poupart's in Third Crossroad. And we see there a jam. There was actually a Poupart's plum that they cultivated. And this may be the red plum jam shown there may actually be made of Poupart's plant. People may also know that Beeches was a huge factory in Brentford, just over the river, not far away. So yes, next please. So this is the jam factory in Third Crossroad, now very plush flats, but still basically architecturally the same. It opened in 1911, and jam was extremely important. Now it's important because it's such a pleasure. Then it was really the major way of preserving fruit. So you get a huge glut of fruit in harvest time, and jam was a fantastic way of preserving it before there was refrigeration and so on. I actually looked up when domestic refrigeration came in, and it was on the same date, 1911, that domestic refrigeration was introduced. But obviously it didn't become common until until much later in the century. So that jam factory opened in 1911 and closed in the 60s. Again, looking back to the nursery lands in the Second War, and one of the features of wartime growing here was the role of prisoners of war. And again, through the Jam Yesterday, Jam Tomorrow project, we managed to get some great insights into that and relationships with the prisoners who were based around that area. And that's a photograph of 3 German prisoners of war working at Page's in Hampton. And it's in 1947, interestingly, and there were prisoners of war based in Britain up until 1948. Okay, Next. Now bringing it really locally to Marble Hill. The photograph on the aerial photograph on the left, you'll see is a photograph of Marble Hill Park with the Thames running down the right-hand bottom side. And so you can see a bit of Orleans Park off to the left, just to orient you there, and Marble Hill House, the small red square in the middle. So you can see a huge area that's now rugby pitches and a wildflower meadow and you know, the lovely places we like to walk. All that was allotments, and an area in the southeast of the park by the river as well. There are allotments here today, and I've got a couple of pictures of them. Kate will be telling us much more about those later. Next. And it wasn't, although these aerial photographs are from the Second War, actually in 1918, there were 95 allotment plots in use at Marble Hill Park, we discovered from an entry in the Ealing and West Middlesex Gazette. And there were allotments there right up until the 1960s. It's quite a big area. It's 13 out of the 60 acres devoted to allotments. And that means that there were approximately 200 plots at Marble Hill. That's a tenth of the entire borough currently. So it was a big business for Marble Hill, and that was fantastic. So coming right up to date, this is growing food for ourselves is a modern movement. I picked out a couple of examples here. On the right, Pam Warhurst, CBE from Incredible Edible, set up an amazing organisation in Todmorden in West Yorkshire. And in 2009, they were reporting that food growing had grown by a third, and that a lot more people, 15 times more people than previously, were keeping chickens. So they were doing all kinds of food production, not just vegetables. And locally, Abundance London and Karen Liebridge has done amazing work of food growing, including using spaces on high streets. So things like growing fruit trees on high street locations. So it's really a modern movement that's inspiring everybody there. And next. Okay, and I hand over to Kate here to tell us more about Marble Hill and what's going on.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are continuing the tradition as well of growing vegetables at Marble Hill. I don't know if everybody knows, but we do have what we call a kitchen garden. It's over in the northeast of the park. So it's right in the corner by the play centre. And traditionally, this is where the kitchen garden would have been when Henrietta had her gardens there. This project was actually set up by the Environment Trust as part of Jam Yesterday, Jam Today, Jam Tomorrow, I think. And it was just an area of the park that was covered in brambles at the time, and they cut down the brambles, they dug over the area, and they built the raised beds over a period of 6 years. So they did a marvellous thing in the corner. And we're carrying on now, so we're growing vegetables for sale for local people, but also allotments for local people. We're hoping to extend it as well. So next slide, please. The type of vegetables we grow, we try to grow more unusual vegetables, really. So we try and grow things that you wouldn't be able to get from any supermarket. So the slide on the left is a pumpkin called Turk's Turban, which is a nice pumpkin for soup or for making pumpkin pie. And we tend to grow the golden courgettes just because they're not that easy to buy in the shops. We tend to have quite a range of potatoes, and it's quite interesting because we tend to then, the volunteers will take them home and cook them and analyse them. So if you come to buy vegetables from us, you can get experience, get advice from volunteers. They'll tell you what type of, what's the best way to grow, cook the potatoes and things like that. And on the right-hand side is one of our chalkboards So every Thursday morning we sell vegetables to local people. You can come along. We don't do it during the winter because we don't have enough vegetables at the moment, but there'll be a chalkboard telling you what's in season, what we're growing. We don't use any chemicals there, and it's all very locally grown. So usually we've just picked it freshly on a Thursday morning. So do come along and see us starting in March. As part of the project, we're extending the vegetable garden. So this is a picture of David, our ranger here. I don't know if you've been to the vegetable garden, but you probably have seen that it was split into 2 areas. So part of the project, we're actually extending it and joining those 2 areas, which is giving us a massive extra amount of growing space, which is fantastic because we are going to be producing vegetables for the new cafe when that opens in spring. And again, that's going to provide fresh vegetables, which is basically just travelled across the park to the cafe. So the food will be so much better and tastier because there's no air miles at all. So it will be fantastic. And next slide, please, Fran. We also use the space not just for growing vegetables, but it's used by lots and different groups. The local nursery group uses it all the time. So you often see little groups of toddlers learning how to pick potatoes. We've used it for quite a few groups this year. We used it for Wild Minds, which is a group for young people with mental health problems, and it gives them that space to work with nature and feel safe and just experience growing vegetables, but for lots of different groups. And it's a lovely space for people just to sit and learn about growing vegetables or just sit and contemplate. So if you're in the park, come and have a look at the kitchen garden because it's a lovely space to visit and see what type of vegetables we're growing. Okay.
Thank you. Unmute Rachel.
We just wanted to say a huge thank you for being with us, for sharing about, listening about some of the history of the growing that happens on site and in our local area. And just to sign a thanks to the Environment Trust Stroke Heritage and Habitats and Heritage to say thank you for working with us on this. We were very lucky that one of our volunteers managed to find that article that we were able to bring to this about the First World War allotments. So it's our collaboration that is a really lovely thing to be able to support our local charities. And so if you would like to donate to the Environment Trust, you do a great job. The link is there. And also English Heritage itself is a charity. It costs over £200,000 per year to keep it open. So if you feel able and would like to, please do help us support Marble Hill. And thank you for your time and thank you for being part of the Marble Hill Revival.
That's great, thank you. Right, we've had some questions, so I'm just gonna go to those. Let me just stop sharing my screen for a moment so I can see them properly. Fantastic. Well, thank you for your questions. If you do have any other questions at this time, please do pop them in the chat. So I'm just going to go back through them now. So Stephen, there's a question here for you. Someone likes the map of the land use of London. Is there a source of this so they can study it more closely? Do you know, will the sources be included in the presentation at all?
Yes, I can look up the source. It's actually, well, the author is a Henry Hay, and it's 1811. But the source, it actually came from one of our fact sheets, so I'd have to dig back a bit to see where the original source is. But I think it probably, if you just search for that Henry Hay map, that would come, if that's the one you meant. The geological map came from a recent geological survey.
Fantastic. And a statement here, Royal Paddock's allotments are celebrating their centenary next year. Congratulations to you. And they have said all are welcome to come to events. So fingers crossed for you that we're able to go back to holding events as we did. And Let's hope there. Will
Brilliant.
it be available online? Yes, the recording of this will be available on YouTube shortly, in the next week or so. So once we get those up on the English Heritage Marble Hill YouTube account. Lovely. Question for probably you, Stephen. How many women joined the Women's Land Army? Mark.
Sorry, I'm laughing because I don't actually know the answer to that, and it occurred to me to look it up 10 minutes before now. So I'm going to have to look it up, add to the presentation that we send down, but I don't know the total force. There's quite a lot of good further information about it actually on the British Legion website, and there's also information about all the other women's forces that there were, including, for example, a women's force that was dedicated to moving aircraft in the country so that it was at the right place for pilots. So all kinds of women's service, but I'm sorry, I don't know the exact answer to the question.
Okay, and then another question, are there any apple or other fruit trees that are specifically local to the area, Hampton, Twickenham? Possibly for you, Kate.
Yeah, I can answer that. Actually, there is quite a lot that's local to the area. Felton was particularly an area where a lot of fruit was grown, and there is an apple tree called Felton Beauty. Yeah. So yeah, there are quite a lot of fruit trees, particularly named after the area, and Felton Beauty is one of the ones that I know because we planted them. We haven't planted them at Marble Hill, but it's one that we could probably get hold of. It would be quite interesting. So yeah. And
we're planting our orchard, aren't we, Kate?
Yeah, yes, we're planting. So we're in the middle of planting our orchard at the moment. These aren't varieties that are local to the area, but they're heritage varieties, which it's important to plant heritage varieties these days so that we don't lose these types of fruit that are very important. And they tend to have a different taste as well to fruit that you get in shops. So it is very important to try and keep these heritage varieties going. Yeah.
That's great.
I think that's all the questions we've got at the moment, unless I've missed any further up. No. If you do have any other questions, please do pop them in the chat. Yes, Rachel's got a question or a statement.
I'm afraid it's not really a question. It's a kind of a little plug to say that if you've enjoyed this session, we'll be obviously doing some more with the Environment Trust around sustainability in waste and water. But also on Thursday, we're working with the Poppy Factory. Obviously, the poppy was a very important part of Richmond's history, and with the Poppy Factory we are doing a session at 6 o'clock on Thursday, so do come along if you're free for that also. Sorry, terrible plug.
Any other questions at all? Please do pop them in the chat. And while those questions are coming through, I'll just add a sort of a thank you from us for joining tonight and your questions and your engagement with the project. We do hope you enjoyed it and do hope that you're managing to stay safe and well and fill your time with nice things in this second period of lockdown that we're facing. I think we haven't had any extra questions in at the moment. Oh, there we go. Got another one here. Do you grow any local veg varieties? So one for you, Kate.
We don't grow any particularly, no, at the moment. But we're always looking for interesting different varieties to grow and different heritage varieties. But we actually, no, I tell a lie, actually, we do grow, there's a bean called Q Blue, which is one of the ones that we do grow. Stephen knows that. And it's actually very precious. The beans are like gold. I actually have people coming asking if we have any of the beans. So, and it has a lovely blue colour to it. So yeah, that's one of the local vegetables that we do grow.
Lovely, thank you.